Okay, this last section is about functional movement and how we can utilize proper functional movement to elevate athletes. So what is functional movement? Functional movement is a set of real-world specific movements that are the foundation of proper muscular function and coordination in an athlete. So what I mean by this is there are movements done in skills practice, there are movements done in the weight room, but those are not always the movements that we see on field or on court. And functional movements are movements that each athlete would need to do in their specific sport that should be consistent through all sports. So a squatting position, a jump, a landing position, all of those things should be something that someone can complete in a way that is skillful and coordinated and reduces the risk of injury. Now, these are multi-directional, multi-joint movements that place demands on the body's core musculature. Again, we're talking about squats, lunges, landing from a jump. And what we believe is that athletes who have the inability to perform these movements skillfully and with proper form may be at risk for injury. All right, so let's look at a few ways on how we assess functional movement, or at least how I assess functional movement. There are some standardized scales out, but I think each sports medicine or sports performance practitioner looks at different aspects of movement as they are related to the individual sport. I really like to focus on lower extremity. I think that can be helpful to illustrate in all athletes, but there's a whole set of assessments that can be done for the upper extremity as well. So let's take a look at single leg balance. Okay, looking at the single leg balance in more detail, what you'll see here, what we're looking for is on the video on the right, what we want to see is even shoulders. So we want to see these shoulders being even and level across with no tilt to one side or the other. We also want to see at that same time that the body is not tilting to the right or tilting to the left, fully extending that heel back as completely as we can. We also just want to see good balance here. So we want to see that this knee is not diving inward and maintaining good balance, as well as coordination as we do this movement. Very simple movement, but can be challenging for an athlete who does not have good balance or single leg stability. And then another exercise that I like that really exposes athletes is this single leg step down. So usually we're on a 12-inch or a 15-inch box, and what we're doing is single leg stepping down and the heel is hitting the ground. Now, there are several ways in which this exercise can be challenging. So what you'll see here is that this right knee wants to dive inward when the athlete does not have the ability to stand on one leg. You'll also see that the shoulders dive to the opposite side to keep your balance, or you'll see that the hands flail up in the air. And so I think keeping this exercise in your back pocket to look at single leg stability is quite nice. Another challenging exercise is the sit to stand. So basically sitting on the edge of the chair here and then standing up using one leg. And what you will see is as the athlete stands up, there's a number of corrections that they'll do. So one is that they'll lean their body to the opposite side because they can't create enough force standing up. The second is that they will touch the knees together in order to create enough leverage to stand up. So try this on your own and see it is quite challenging. What we're looking for is a stable upper body. We're looking for keeping the legs apart, so not using them to push off of each other, and then keeping that knee in a neutral position where it does not dive inward. So that's a nice test looking at the sit to stand. And then the last test here is looking at a drop jump test. And so really what we're looking at is step off the box, drop down, and jump directly in the air. So what I'd like to do is just slow this down a little bit, because I want you guys to see as we come down, we drop off this box, we want to see knees outward. We do not want to see our knees caving inward. We want to see stable shoulders as well. And then as the athlete goes back up, here's where you'll see those knees dive inward in order to create enough force to get up in the air. And so when you're stable, as you hit the ground, your knees should be parallel and not diving inward. And that's what we'll see in this scenario as well. Let's talk a little bit about a dynamic warm-up and what the purpose of a dynamic warm-up is. So basically here, we're trying to get away from the static, slow stretching that athletes do before a competition, before a practice. Data suggests that what we really need to be doing is turning on the muscles, making sure that that nervous system is talking directly to the muscle so that those muscles can be activated prior to a competition, prior to a practice, rather than this slow stretching routine that a lot of athletes are used to doing. And I think what we need to understand is that there is a connection between that nervous system and the musculature, and the ability to get that communication going early can be a way in which the body is adaptable to the changes that we see on the field, to the changes that we see in the court. We also want to be able to have the muscles move throughout a full range of motion. So in other words, we want to have that being done on a speed which is more consistent to what the athlete's going to see within the competition or within the practice. And that's going to help also activate these connections with the muscles. So basically the goal is to work on getting the body as well as the musculature that is going to be used in which sequence it's going to be used to get that pump primed for whatever activity is to come. And that's going to help with overall increased performance and hopefully decreasing the injury rate. All right, looking more closely at our dynamic warm-up, here what you'll see is just taking the trunk and flexing it down and scooping forward and stretching out those hamstrings. So this can be done in a kind of non-mobile situation where you're just doing it in place, or you can do this so like in a basketball athlete, doing it to the three-point line from the end line and then walking our way all the way out and then coming back and doing the other side as well. And then in addition to that hamstring scoop, here's what's called a walking side lunge. So just side lunging all the way out and then side lunging all the way down, creating a good flexion at the trunk, good stable knee position as well. Next exercise in a dynamic warm-up that I like to see is a walking side rotational lunge. So just doing a nice lunge, so good 90-90 positioning of the knees, and then a trunk rotational position as well is a nice part of the functional movement. And then lastly here, what we're seeing is a walking toe touch. So just stepping forward, touching the toe, coming all the way through. This is a good example of a walking toe touch to develop some flexibility and motion prior to a workout. I also want to go through some gluteal exercises. I really feel like these exercises are a foundational exercise that can be used throughout a variety of different sports, a variety of different positions. And these are things that athletes can do on their own at home to work on functional movement and functional strength, and as well as injury prevention. I believe that the hip and gluteal area, and not just me, others who I've learned from, the hip and gluteal area, including the glute medius, glute maximus, the iliopsoas on the front side of the hip, all of those muscles are critical for hip and core stability. But basically, we want to think about the fact that if we can spend some time focused on these areas to maintain our core stability, as well as improvements in how our pelvis, hip, and gluteal muscles work together, that can improve functional strength in sports, as well as reduce our risk of injury. Here are banded sidewalks, and I love this exercise because you should feel some significant burn in those glutes. So what you'll notice is we're in a nice squatted position. We're not standing upright, and we're extending the knee outward, but keeping the hips and pelvis in a stable position. So this is a great exercise. You can even add this to your dynamic warm-up, but it's a great hip and gluteal exercise as well. Here I like a simple kettlebell swing. The key at this exercise is, see that thrust that he does at the very end, where as he gets up, he pops his glutes forward, it pops his pelvis forward. That is accentuating the glute squeeze, and that's a nice technique for a kettlebell swing as well. A little bit easier exercises, but a little bit more challenging for the less experienced athlete is this bird dog. So holding this position, coming down, and really what we want to see is a squeeze of the glute at that top. This can be nice if you're just starting out, learning some hip and gluteal exercises where you have to maintain a stable core, but also keep good glute strength. And then, of course, some core exercises. So a side plank here, you can either do a hold in that side plank, or you can go up and down. But again, you're strengthening the hip and glute on this underside to be able to keep the body up and off of the mat. Is another good side plank exercise to work on hip and gluteal strength. And last but not least, I also love to work on single leg stability exercises. The reason why I like single leg stability is that is much more realistic to what goes on in a sport. So if you're having to cut on one foot, or you get knocked from side to side and you have to land on one foot when you're coming down from a rebound or a serve in volleyball, those things can be missed when you're doing these heavyweight exercises in a weight room. But if you're more focusing on lighter weight single leg stability exercises during other times, they can certainly be quite helpful. Even in runners, single leg stability exercises are quite helpful. As I've talked about before, running is a single leg sport. You are jumping from one leg to the next. And that shows us that we need to be really focused on single leg stability exercises for one, performance enhancement, as well as injury prevention. So let's take a look at some single leg stability exercises that athletes can use within their training programs. Many aspects of those sports that we just talked about have to do with direction change as well as single leg landing. If we can work on single leg strengthening and stability, we can help the body maintain its coordination, its strength, and overall balance when we're dealing with a single leg activity. Now, yes, most of the time both legs are on the field or court, but we want the body to be ready when there is a single leg landing, when there is a perturbation, so you get knocked into by another athlete and have to catch your balance. That's really where the single leg stability exercises can be quite useful. Now we're talking about single leg stability here. So this is a nice exercise, the split squat. So basically, foot up on the bench, doing a single leg squat. And you can see with the model, they're keeping their shoulders upward, not leaning forward, and then they're using a little kettlebell as a counterweight in order to stabilize the body. And then another good example here is the single leg deadlift. So again, a nice, smooth, fluid position where she's demonstrating the glute squeeze as she touches the kettlebell to the ground, keeping that single leg balance. And then you can add that leg lift in as well to add to single leg stability. So a nice little exercise to add to your routine as you develop your own individualized program. I did want to throw a few comments in about plyometric exercises. A lot of times athletes do ask about how to increase speed, how to increase agility. And to be honest, the overarching theme in all of the answers is, if you want to try to get faster, you need to move faster, you need to move quicker, and you need to teach the body how to react in its what we call its stretch shortening cycle. So when the muscle contracts, how to contract and then quickly get out of that contraction. And that's where plyometric exercises can be helpful in training the body for speed and agility. The plyometric exercises we're talking about are dynamic movements that involve rapid muscular contraction and lengthening followed by a forceful contraction. And so what that means is, if we can get faster at doing moves that we already are doing within a sport, the body will become quicker over time. And we do think that it can also decrease the risk of injury in our lower extremities. And last but not least here, the plyometric exercises. You will see this is just a box jump. So a good, quick, forceful contraction to jump up. You have to be careful doing this repetitively. I have seen people injure their ankle when they fall off the box, as well as hit their shins on that box. But this is the concept of a box jump with a step down to work on plyometrics. And then lastly here, you'll see the jumping lunge. So again, very quick, forceful contractions as opposed to the other exercises, but adding this in to a routine program can be helpful when working on speed, agility, and power. All right, that's what we've got for functional movement, foundational movement. The overarching premise here is there are a set of movements that each athlete can develop and train on their own over time to help with overall performance as well as injury prevention.